Kuzombo to all our viewers. You're watching BBS Channel 2, the Jangchub Shing. I'm your host, Jangchub, and for those of you who are watching this program for the first time, what we do on the show is discuss Buddhist truths in an effort to better comprehend the vast and timeless Buddha Dharma with Buddhist masters, practitioners, and scholars. The topic in discussion today is youth in Buddhism, and my guest is the great Buddhist master, Her Eminence Jetsun Khandro Rinpoche, one of the very few fully trained female Rinpoches in the world. Her Eminence is one of the most influential and vibrant women teachers. Being fully trained in Buddhist teachings, Her Eminence is also well-versed in journalism, business management, homeopathy, and the arts of sciences. Welcome to the show, Rinpoche.
Thank you.
Buddhism in Bhutan is more than just a religion. It is a way of life, and everything that we do is somehow interconnected. And there's a great deal that we can learn from the Buddha Dharma in the modern context. First of all, what is your perception of Buddhism in Bhutan, Rinpoche?
I think for the several visits that I have been able to pay here in Bhutan, the experience has left me with a very deep impression of how blessed this country is. When we look at it from the background of Buddhist countries, of course, Tibet and particularly India, Tibet, then Bhutan, Nepal, China, all of these countries have been extraordinarily blessed and fortunate to have the Buddha's teachings. And then subsequently through the ages and the centuries, great many masters who have taught and who have propagated the teachings and have benefited the people of the different regions. But through times, whether it is 2,500 years or whether it is now almost 1,200 years of Tibet and Bhutan and these countries, where they have connected with the Buddhist teachings, especially with the teachings of Vajrayana through the teachings and the presence of Guru Rinpoche and then all his students and then subsequent all the great masters. A lot of changes have occurred. And in some places, the changes are very impactful and very visible. But the perception that I've had of Bhutan is that it is one of the rarest of the places where the Dharma seems to be, the Buddha's teachings seem to be so deeply ingrained and seeped. So it's almost, of course, we come on a pilgrimage and we see wonderful sacred places where Guru Rinpoche and the great Tertuns have meditated and teachers have taught. But I can really personally experience that there's hardly a patch of land that doesn't seem to be touched by the Dharma and by the blessings of these great teachers. So it's very vibrant, it's very palpable. The Dharma is very palpable, it's still very much breathing. And as you said very correctly, it is not just limited to being a faith and a religion, but it has given direction to people who live here in shaping their life according to the teachings of the Dharma. So it's very alive, and that is very inspiring, I think, for everyone who comes here, not just for Buddhists, but I'm sure for anyone who doesn't have any conceptual idea of what Buddhism is. You can still see that energy and the blessing of what the vision and the view of the Buddhist teachings are very, very alive. And that's, I think, a very impactful impression that I carry with me. It's deeply inspiring. And I think the people who live in this country are very blessed and very, very fortunate. For that, I think it makes Bhutan really unique and stand out. And I think it is, and it has become, as we know that what Bhutan stands for today and how the greater world sees Bhutan, I really think it's an oxygen for life. And there's that sense of fresh air and natural simplicity. And I think that's so much deeply intertwined with the Buddhist presence of the Buddhist teachings, even in the most ordinary of the person, starting from there to all of the great teachers who are here.
Bhutan truly is a unique place. And another thing about Bhutan, Rinpoche, I'm sure you're aware that Bhutan's population is made up of 65% youth. And His Majesty has always stressed how important the youth are. He had said they are the jewels of our nation. Now, at this crucial stage in their lives, they are the most impressionable. In essence, it is one of the most important times in their lives in shaping and molding one's adulthood. So naturally, it is a vested interest for all of us, including the youth themselves, to bring themselves up as an educated, independent, and an upright citizen to hold humanity's greatest values for the benefit of all sentient beings. Rinpoche now, since you have traveled all around the world and had interactions with various youth from different backgrounds, what is your perception of the Bhutanese youth?
I think when a country has almost 65% of its population, 64 or 65 percentage of its population as being youth, I think it's a very powerful resource for the country, because it makes the country very young. And it is, of course, there's always it has to be channeled correctly, because it's at that juncture where it can go in a positive way, and it can have its own challenges as well. But I think if it is channeled, that youthful energy is channeled in the right direction, then I think Bhutan as a country and the youth of citizens of this country, the young citizens of this country, has one of the most powerful opportunities in how you can now shape yourselves and define yourselves. Because I think in this age and era that we are living in, where there's tremendous speed of growth and changes and modernization that's happening, there is also a very strong sensation, that sense that we all have of being at a breakneck speed, where we are not thinking very carefully. And so a lot of people feel very worried, intellectuals, and especially people who are in positions of authority and thinkers, and people who have concern for the growth and the benefit of all beings. There's a deep concern about the madness and the chaos and the confusion that we are creating in the sort of the system of busyness and the system of modernization that's happening. But now when you have a young nation, a nation of many youth and powerful abilities that are there, opportunities that are there, then I think you can really define something. You can give direction to the rest of the world in saying this is the template that we have, where you can really balance modernization plus as well as the tradition. And so my perception of the youth here as a young country has been a very interesting one. I've, for the first time, had some days to sort of observe, and I am very, very impressed with them, because I think it's a that group of young people seem to be filled with energy. I do sense a sense of restlessness in that energy, which is very understandable, because there's you who you are, and then there's the changing world that is out there. So you have to try and find a balance between both of them. But I think this is wonderful. And it is even more so, I think, because His Majesty is a young person, and he is such a beautiful example of tradition and modernization. And I think the young people who are always looking for an inspiring figure, because I think the youth does best when there is a good leader, because you're based upon enthusiasm, and there's a lot of youthful energy and inspiration. So that energy and enthusiasm has to have a good framework of a leadership that really points it into the right direction. And I think people are very lucky here that you have that. You have His Majesty the Fourth King, you have the Fifth His Majesty the King, and I think that is a very good model of leadership where it balances both of these traditions. So I think if that can be all channeled into a wonderful, powerful resource, as they say, the sky's the limit for the young nation here, and then I think it can really become a good template. What I would like to really hope for is that the young people of Bhutan create a template of what it means to be who you are, and to have the pride of that tradition and the culture, but also to be able to adapt to the modernization and that what is happening in today's world. So that's one impression that I have, and it'll be something that we all look forward to seeing how that evolves. And then, of course, I'm personally, because I'm myself a Buddhist, so I'm very impressed with the fact of how much sense of curiosity and wish to learn more attitude is there among the youth in terms of what Buddhism is. And I think that is very, very wonderful, because Buddhism does not do very well as just a belief system, because it was never really formulated by the Buddha himself as being a religion itself. It has to be a something that you really evolve with in your life, and you imbue that in your life. So I think if the young people of Bhutan study the Dharma, not as just a religion to follow, but how you could take the concepts of Buddhism to truly bring a better sense of awareness and growth, and how that can beautify your own life and bring in the strength and then the right perspective to life, I think this is going to be really, really remarkable. And so for many other teachers who have visited Bhutan, the one consistent thing I've always heard is there's a young group of people who really want to study the Dharma and to understand what Buddhism is all about. And I take great delight in seeing that that is still there, and I hope that it can be responded to.
Indeed, I think we are definitely very lucky that we have a role model like Our Majesty to look up to as a template, as Rinpoche had said. But I'm glad Rinpoche had also mentioned this modern development, and my next question is related to that. With the unprecedented development of Bhutan over the last 5 decades, and a rampant influx of the Western culture in the form of movies, music, fashion style, our youth are somewhat looking outwards, and at times maybe forgetting to look inwards and maintaining our unique form of identity that is deeply embedded with Buddhist teachings. Now, taking into account that change is inevitable, how can the youth find balance? Now, I know Rinpoche had talked about that in the earlier question, but to lead a life in a meaningful way, by way of maybe filtering in just a positive aspect about globalization or Westernism, if you will.
Yeah. Well, as you said, change is inevitable. It is going to happen, whether we like it or not. It's sometimes very unsettling for especially the older generation, to see so much changes. And then what's happened in the last 5 decades or so are incredible changes. And so I think this is a good juncture where everyone needs to be very careful. And it is, I think the Buddhist teachings itself is a very good, advantage, as well as a view that gives us the right direction. As you know, the whole Buddhist teachings is based upon middle path, and all answers are in creating that balance of a middle path. I think the biggest mistake that we could make is to take on very extreme views, and I think that's always been the reason why we've encountered obstacles and hurdles when change occurs. And that is, we divide ourselves into 2 groups. There's a group of people who reject modernization, and they really value tradition and how things used to be and what they're familiar with. We have to keep in mind that going into unfamiliar ground is always very challenging, and one is very afraid of it. So the fear sometimes makes us just recoil back into our own safe cocoons, because that's what is familiar. So that's one group of people who then speak a lot against change and modernization, globalization. At the same time, then there is the other extreme group that go blindly into modernization, especially. I think both the extremes can be very harmful. So you have to really find the balance. The middle path comes in as being very, very effective and very, very something that can really give us or point to us in the right direction, is where we can understand and value what is our tradition, what is our culture, because it is that what has brought us to being our identity. This is who we are, and we've come this far. And the fact that others appreciate and recognize you is based upon the richness and the wealth of our culture, our identity as a nation, our own individuality, our belief system. But globalization, whether we like it or not, is going to happen. That is there. So there's no point in rejecting that. And we have to have the wisdom to extract what is good. I think the mistake some young people, or everyone makes, I don't think it's just the problem of the youth, but since we're talking about the young generation, is that one tends to see only the resultant aspects of things. And you don't necessarily see the kind of hard work, the kind of sacrifices, and also sometimes the negative aspects of what is there. Whether it is pop stars, whether it is film stars, whether it is businessmen, whatever it may be that we look at. And in this world of fast track, everybody wants to get to the resultant state. But you don't really recognize the amount of hard work that goes into making a K-pop star. Now that's one of the very fashionable things here. So you paint your hair and you look like them and you dress up like them. That's fine, but then you have to also look at 18 hours of hard work that they put in every day to be there. You also have to know that out of 10,000 comes one who is about there. So I think globalization and the modernization, I think that's wonderful, and the youth needs to cultivate that into, and that's going to happen. It's inevitable. But you have to have a very pragmatic understanding of the hard work that is also involved there. Just being modern isn't going to be the solution to everything. So a good balance, middle path, a good balance where you treasure and you keep what is workable. I think as far as culture and tradition is concerned, I think we need to really treasure and retain what is workable. One of the remarkable visionary views of the Buddha himself was that when he taught, he always said, but you have to evolve with time. What is not workable when times change has to be let go as not being workable. So we have to have that amount of humility and a sense of being practical in knowing that there are certain things that might not be any longer workable. And yet there are many things that are workable, and then we can continue to preserve them. And then embrace the change and take on whatever the world is going through, but also have a very sane attitude towards it so that you can filter and look at all the positive things that you can do. Now, maybe this is just a very idealistic, visionary sort of a thing, but it would be a wonderful blend if you could retain some of the very wonderful, workable traditions, and then you extracted the best that the modern world has to offer. And if you could make a melange or sort of a mixture of both of these two, that would just be, I think, the best thing that could ever happen for the world. And since you're a young nation and all the youth seem to be so full of vigor and enthusiasm, I think the possibility of that being able, I think, is really there, and I hope that that happens.
Drug addiction, violence, teen pregnancy, and sexually transmitted disease amongst the youth are issues that almost all the nations are battling.
Absolutely.
And Bhutan is pretty much the same. Mm-hmm. So what can you, Rinpoche, advise the youth in terms of living a harmonious, clean, mentally strong, and physically healthy lifestyle?
To live a harmonious life, I think the key is contentment. Mind you, you have to understand the concept of contentment very correctly, because when you literally translate the word contentment, sometimes people misunderstand it to being complacency. That you have to be content means I'm content with who I am, I'm content with who I'm under, I'm content with whatever the situation is, and so forth. That is not what I mean by contentment. Contentment, the way I see it, is very deeply connected to confidence. There's one thing that young people in the East, not just Bhutan, but young people in the East tend to suffer from, is you let outer conditions define who you are. You carry an expensive purse, that defines who you are. You can drive a fancy car, that defines who you are. You travel the world, or you buy a business class ticket, and that defines who you are. Now, I think when the tendency to let outer conditions define who you are, then you're looking outward. And that's an endless rest, because you have one, someone has two. You have two, someone has three. If you have three, someone has four. So that sort of just makes you go outward, and you lose the confidence of who you are. You lose the peace and the sense of discovering your individual, innate qualities and potential. Now, the Buddhist teachings talk about human life as being one of the most wonderful, extraordinary qualities. Just being born as a human being as a wonderful opportunity. Now, why it is called so is because human beings innately themselves have all the incredible qualities. Patience is not acquired from somewhere else. It's a quality that is natural within you if you can tap into that quality inside you, potential inside you. Kindness is not an acquired quality. Kindness is an innate quality. Likewise, anything good, even if it is peace and harmony, it isn't dependent upon outer conditions. It's something as a potential that is naturally inherent of one's own self. So knowing the key to harmony is to develop that contentment of knowing that you yourself are capable of really generating extraordinary qualities. You are a source of happiness to yourself and to the others. You can define whether today you're going to create an environment of peace or aggression. That's the power you have within your own self. Contentment and confidence of that innate quality that you have inherent of your own self, that I think is something we have to learn, something that has to be brought into the education system, and particularly because in the East we tend to have very strong family ties. I think the families need to discuss this more and to encourage young children from a very young age to rely upon the individual human wonderful potentials that are naturally inherent of ourselves, to see that as the source of your contentment, rather than to find contentment in the acquisition of something else from the others. So I think that is extremely helpful. So if I can remember your list correctly, so one was harmonious, one was clean.
Clean, healthy, mentally strong lifestyle.
To be clean, take plenty of showers. Now, the modern world, now we're talking about evolving of modernization. Now, there are wonderful things in the modern world that the modern world teaches us. How to take care of our environment, how to physically be hygienic, for example. There are certain habits that we have in the East that are more harmful for yourself, the spread of diseases and so forth. So in the context of sexually transmitted diseases and drug addiction and so forth, I think this all comes into that category of education, where hygiene and well-being of one's own self, and truly to treasure your environment. Those, I think, are wonderful things that we need to bring into our education system and families. To be mentally strong, I would say that nothing works better than meditation, and that is very important. Now, I'm always a little bit deeply concerned in today's discussions with some young people, especially among the Eastern young people, who sort of seem to take pride in saying things like, I don't meditate because it's boring, it's difficult. You sort of leave the meditation to the Gomchens and to the yogis and then something of the past. And I've heard people who say things like, I can't sit still, and therefore I can't meditate.
Could it be because they don't understand what meditation exactly is?
Absolutely
if you
true.
could explain that.
Absolutely true. So I think when I say meditate, I don't necessarily mean sit cross-legged and be still for a long period of time. That's one way to meditate too. But what I mean by to develop mental strength through meditation is you have to bring mindful awareness in your life. And now again, mindfulness is such a publicized and it's almost become a commodity these days. So I'd like to use different words in that is meditation, let's not use that word. Mindfulness, let's not use that word. Contemplation, let's not use that word. Awareness, let's not use that word. What I usually like to say is observe yourself. You watch yourself. You're a human being. And what you do, what you say, and how you think defines your individual character, as well as it is something that you then interact, bring out, and that is the basis of interaction with the larger world. So if you know that what you are saying, how you're thinking, and what you are doing impacts yourself and the others, there has to be, as a human being, as a sane human being, a sense of responsibility. Why did I say the way I said it? Why do I think the way I do? Why am I so angry? Why am I so discontent? Why is it that I'm so restless? without trying to find an answer and a solution immediately, you have to first thing do is you have to watch yourself. You have to watch how you're doing it and why you're doing it. That's the key to any meditation. Yes. If you try to relate to a medicine without actually knowing the harmfulness of the disease, you won't appreciate the medicine. But the one who really sees the disease and wants to eradicate will always find that sitting 15 minutes is the easiest thing that you can do if that is able to bring about a good solution to your problems. So I think watch yourself, be responsible as a human being, knowing that that sense of responsibility is coming out from the fact that you are very powerful in your actions and in your thought patterns and your speech. Your emotions and feeling can define happiness and suffering in another person's life, even between a husband and a wife or a partner or siblings. Who you are as an individual, the amount of peace that you have inside of yourself usually determines whether it's a good family, happy family or not. So that has to build responsibility. Now, when you begin to observe and watch yourself and you begin to question your own attitude and your own conduct, that then I think at a certain point illuminates in your mind the wish to then correct yourself, the wish to better yourself. And that's, I think, a very good basis where a person then learns about Buddhist teachings to see how can I take that knowledge to then better myself. Then Dharma itself also no longer becomes a religion of faith to follow, but it becomes a medicine that can help you determine what kind of a life you're going to live, what kind of a life you're going to give to your family and to your society. So for mental strength, I always think meditation in that context is very helpful. Then physical well-being, sports. I really think that's important. And of course, it's a country that loves different kinds of outdoor sports, so there's not much for me to say, but I'm very struck by the fact that I can drive to certain areas and there are those exercising machines there. And I think that that's wonderful. I think that's something that we Easterners have to learn to do, and walking outdoors or any form of physical exercises and sports is, I think, very important. I think we tend to be very introverted in the Eastern societies. And that sort of, we take it as a pride. Oh, I don't do these kind of frivolous things. But as a human being, I think the interaction with nature is very important. But foremost of all, I think for mental well-being and physical well-being, not separating these two but bringing it together, I think any kind of physical activity that is wholesome and that is a group event, I think it's wonderful. I usually encourage everyone to sing a lot, dance a lot, run around a lot, because that sort of de-stresses. Psychologically, it's very important to de-stress yourself in that way. So there it is. So I would suggest contentment and confidence of who you are and your natural qualities, then being hygienic and being aware of the environment, meditate, and a lot of outdoor activities.
Lasla, I'm glad Rinpoche mentioned about physical activity, being responsible, being aware of who you are, questioning yourself so that you're confident. But a lot of times the youth might feel frustrated and might feel that their voices and cries are not being heard by the parents, school teachers, politicians, or anyone in the authority. I may be generalizing here, but we adults tend to somehow forget that we were also young at one point. And as soon as we look upon the youth, we treat them like children with the notion that we know the best. So we sort of like tell them what to do. Right. We forget that these youth are capable of independent thoughts, ideas, and certain know-how of the modern world that we might never know. So Rinpoche, how can we bridge this gap, this ever-widening gap, this generation gap that creates so much misunderstanding?
We have a certain mindset that after you're of a certain age, you have to sort of stop being curious. You have to stop learning. Older people, especially nowadays, I think it's a little bit changing, but as soon as, even if you were 40, 50 years old, you took a sort of a sense of pride in saying things like, oh, now it's too late to learn anything. Why would I want to do this? Why would I want to learn this? Or this is something I can't understand. I don't want to see this. I don't want to learn this. And certain times I see parent generation take great pride in saying things like, oh, I don't know where the on button is, and then they don't see it as not learning something new. They see it more as a pride of having reached a certain renunciation or something of that kind. And I think that backfires because you stop learning. Now, when you stop learning, the habit that we have as human beings is what you don't know, you criticize. So that's one problem that we have. Then there's the younger generation that is going at a breakneck speed, discovering many things, and we live in a world of internet and social media and television and just fast track. Everything is very quick. So now what happens is there's a sense of the gap comes because a generation knows things, appreciates things, and there's a generation that doesn't know this. There's no way we can combine both of these together. So I think it's very important that if we are to work towards that, there has to be more dialogue, there has to be more communication, again at these two levels, family level and the education level, where the elder generation has to be encouraged to be curious, to learn. And I don't mean after you're 60 or 70, you learn what K-pop is or what internet is or what Twitter is and so forth, but to know. There has to be a sense of natural curiosity. We're not asking you to start changing your lifestyle completely, but then the older generation has to have a sense of, oh, this is happening and this is how it works, even if you're not involved in it.
Yes.
Whereas the younger generation has to have a sense of, oh, the elder generation doesn't have that kind of an experience, and therefore they have to be more patient in being able to explain better rather than be so held up in their own sort of speed.
Yes.
So even in our situation, or whenever I have the opportunity, the two qualities that I usually try to emphasize is that the older generation must have great love for the young generation. It is the responsibility of older people to have the humility to really be patient and to be loving. There has to be unconditional love for the young generation, to be able to admire youthfulness in the others. Now, in the Buddhist teachings, of all the qualities, in the Bodhisattva teachings, it is said that of all the qualities, one of the hardest qualities as human beings that is there to develop in ourselves is to be happy in the happiness of the others. And so even in the generation of compassion, we say, yes, there's loving kindness, there is compassion, but then there's the third quality, which is gawa, which is joy. Usually people say to be joyful. But if you really look at what is the characteristics of joyfulness, as is in the Bodhisattva teachings, is to be happy not only in your happiness, but to be happy in the happiness of somebody else's happiness. So I wish that that is a quality that we could continually evolve. When you see two young people in love, as an older person, or at least as a monk and a nun even, to not look at them and say, oh, they're now in the throes of samsara and they're totally now stuck in samsara, but to have the fact that you can say how wonderful that they've found love, how wonderful that they can enjoy that moment with one another. So when that quality of genuine love and happiness for the other is cultivated, I think that's the responsibility of the older generation. And in the young generation, I think they must have the humility of respect, because the older generation may not know the gadgets and have not been to universities and colleges, or may not have languages and the understanding of the world and so forth, but one has to give them the credit of direct life experience, which is invaluable. There's nothing that can compare to that. Learning from the books is one thing, and having the direct experience in life is a totally, entirely different thing. So I think when there's love from the older generation to the younger, and the young has the respect for the older generation, then I think that is the key factor. And the way to bring that make that happen cannot be generalized. It cannot be generalized as a global thing that we're all going to do it from day one. I think it has to start at home. And in the house, in the families, if that is inculcated as respect for the experience of the others, and the love for the younger generation, then I think that is something that could bring about a lot of solution to this sort of a gap that is there.
That's love and family dichotomy is very important in terms of, especially when you're a young person growing up, because the pressure of the growing pains can sometimes prove to be a bit too much for the youth.
Absolutely.
The competition for wealth, jobs, good schools, and to look a certain way is ever so apparent through our flawed social construct of what it means to be successful and happy these days. And sometimes it's difficult for the youth who might not have to live up to that expectation. And even for those youth who have, it's an immense pressure to maintain that social class. Now, I don't claim that I know what causes an individual to commit suicide, but I do know that it's a grave concern for all of us as a nation, as a parent, as a brother, sister, mother, father, when a young individual decides to take his or her own life. Rinpoche, if you would, a message of maybe a secular wisdom to promote the precious gift of life, and what we can do as a society to better understand and approach this matter in a compassionate way.
Now that's a very big problem we have. Yes, it's something that's not just happening somewhere, but many of us have had direct experiences within our own families of young people ending their life, and it's just this immense sense of lack of appreciation of this gift of life, and the assumption that suicide is sort of a solution to the problems. I think one needs to look into the ideals of Buddhist teachings, and nothing teaches better the value of life than a correct understanding of impermanence. Now, impermanence, His Holiness my father, Jetsun Khandro Rinpoche, would always teach us, and he would always say, when you encounter any kind of difficulty or any kind of a strong, impactful moment, he would say, always keep in mind, like a mantra in your mind, this will also pass. Impermanence is not just death and dying. Impermanence is to be able to be observant enough to know this will also pass. And we highlight sometimes the passage of happiness, or the happiness passed away, my youth passed away, and all the good things that sort of have become impermanent. But if that is so, then the logic would apply to even challenging things. If happiness is impermanent, suffering is impermanent. If gain is impermanent, loss is impermanent. If something that we build is impermanent, then something that is being destroyed is impermanent. I think the people, young people especially, need to understand this concept that this will also pass, everything moves on. And that leads to, now when we do a lot of thinking and research into what is that one factor that is instigating to the young generation towards suicide, to end of life, we find that, of course, a lot of the blame is the speed with which we're living. There's instant gratification. The stimulants that are there that gratify you immediately. You can download something that you like very much. You can, do a Google search for something that you're curious about, or you can call up a friend. If you're feeling bad, now of course in our culture we have WeChat, and so that WeChat is just so it comes back very quickly. You like something, then you take a snapshot of it, and then you just send it out to everyone. You don't like something, you do that. Now, psychologically, that begins to, it seems, impact and take away from us one thing that used to be our greatest strength, and that is patience. When we had, in the olden times when you were farmers, many of the, the farming was one of the prevalent things, you had to really wait for the crops to grow. You couldn't go to a supermarket and just pull it out of the, counter. So, with the change that is happening in the world today, the speed with which things are happening today, I think the brain and of course, that then shapes our own attitude and conduct, is that we're becoming very fast and very addicted to the stimulants that bring about instant gratification. Now, the downside of that is that it's building up intolerance and impatience. So when you are not patient, then immediate moment's emotion becomes so heightened that you then have no other sort of a a solution other than to sort of take on your life. And that's really becoming very linear oriented. You're not keeping a very vaster vision in your own mind. So I think in order to address this issue that we have of suicide, it is imperative that we bring about different avenues and different ways and methods in which to cultivate patience in our young generation, to be tolerant. So now look at these two mixtures, to have the concept of passage of things, in transitoriness of things, and things being impermanent in nature, that this will also pass. And that allowing you to take a step backwards, to let things really be seen from a vaster vision rather than being so linear oriented. And then if you put that in combination with also the cultivation of patience. To be patient for doesn't mean to be patient for 100 years. Be patient with that one feeling. Be patient with that one emotion. Be patient with, I think, that problem. Or simply put, be patient for one more day. Because when you look back in our own experiences of our own life, I can give myself as an example. There are many moments in my life when I can look back and I think, I wish I was patient. Losing a friend because you ended up in a quarrel and you said something and then you had a fallout and so forth. 10 years, and then you look back and you say, it wasn't that big a deal. I wish I had been patient. Yes. I wish I had just kept quiet for one day. And then today when you look back, so it's these things that if we bring into dialogue and in our communication, it gives, I think, the young people a sense of knowing that while what you are encountering may be very, very impactful, very, very difficult at this moment, but just relax with it a little bit. Give it one more day. Yes. Give it a little bit more time. So that comes back down to these two things, is that this will also pass, it will also change, as many do, as everything does, and that if I am a little bit patient with this, maybe it will ease out and something else will evolve out of that. So we need to really bring that in, especially with everything that is there today in the modern world. I think the principles and the values of qualities of tolerance and patience, and that doesn't mean just being patient and tolerant with someone else or something outside, but with yourself, being patient with yourself, being tolerant of your own self. This is, I think, very important.
Yes. So be patient one more day, because that's very crucial in terms of just understanding how precious your own life is, and maybe you might come up with a different solution the next day, so you never know. So thank you very much for that, Rinpoche. Now let's just shift gear to another direction. Our constitution gives equal rights and freedoms to both female and male. The latest survey done for the happiness index, the elderly, the poor, and women usually tend to be less happy. Rinpoche, you build a reputation as an uncompromising, sharp-witted, and unconventional teacher who continue to question the role of women in Buddhist society. Through your works, you have been a beacon of hope, shattering the stereotype in this male-dominated field. And you are in a lot of ways the medium through which women and girls can become confident, empowered, dynamic leaders. Now, for all the girls who might be watching this program, Rinpoche, what would you tell them?
Personally, I've never understood the difference.
Yes.
I think I would encourage young girls and women to do a lot of introspection in them, because I think the discrimination becomes believable when you believe it.
Yes.
Personally, I was very lucky. I was born into a family, and especially my root teacher, Chapter Rinpoche, was a visionary in his lifetime, and he would always tell us, the difference is if you believe in it. But if you really introspect yourself and you look into your own self and you find, is there a difference or is there not a difference, then that might be a better answer for you than for me to tell you whether there is a difference or not. So in that way, I think what I've tried to do in my life personally is to think a little bit more carefully into seeing the things that I hear, because there are certain expectations of what a woman can do or cannot do, or what is permissible and what is not permissible. And I've had to really look into it and see how much of that is human interpretation versus what is true and what is reality.
Yes.
And then when you look at it, you begin to find that beyond all what is sort of subject to opinions of human beings,
Yes.
the reality is that there is absolutely no difference at all, especially when it comes to cultivating qualities. I've never heard about man compassion being better or worse than a woman's compassion. Never have I heard male truth as opposed to women's truth. I've never found any teachings that talk about, men meditation, women meditation, and so on. These are all, even if we do use it, it's all human beings who have come up with those kind of concepts and ideas. So being that there is, at the very natural essence, no distinction. Having said that, there is physical difficulties and differences. There are, because gender-wise, biologically, a woman and a man are very different. Psychologically, it's different. Emotionally, there are differences. A man is a man, a woman is a woman. In terms of that difference, there is a difference. But then there's a meeting ground of human qualities and human abilities. And at that level, there is absolutely no distinction. In my own examination, in my own thinking, I've never found that. Yes. And therefore, I think women need to allow themselves to be free from the stereotyped, subject to the stereotype belief, and to try and bring about a lot of inner examination to see whether they can themselves innately find the power and the courage and the qualities within one's own self. And to see them more as, I always say that to women, is to see yourself more as a human being.
Yes.
That's the balancing factor. Because when you talk about feministic ideas, women are better than men. You have a lot of women saying that as well. And that is something I also don't necessarily agree with.
Yes.
I don't think women are better than men. I don't think men are better than women. We have equal opportunities, we make equal mistakes, we have equal good qualities. And the meeting ground is to discover that you are a human being and whether you appreciate the qualities that are natural to you. This is very, very important for women to keep in mind. But having said that, since I am a woman and there are problem areas, especially in the many societies, not necessarily East, and you find that in even greatly modern societies of the West, there are discriminations. And therefore, because in the society there are those challenges, I think I do encourage women to do what I've tried to do, because my father, His Holiness, used to always say, he would always say, you must have the humility to listen to everybody, but in the eventual, it's your own decision. And so that's what I try to always impart to all the young girls, is you must have the humility to listen to what other people expect out of you or what other people would suggest that you do. But at the end of the day, it's your decision that you have to reconcile with. And deep down, look into your own mind, look into what would make you happy and independent and confident, and to stay with that. But with the advice and the suggestions and the expectations, skillfully and with wisdom evolve so that you can have the humility, but at the same time, never in that humility lose the strength and the courage that is yours. Yes. Eleanor Roosevelt, there's a wonderful quote from her where she says, no one can make you inferior without your consent. And I try to keep that in mind.
Yes. Rinpoche, you have created retreat centers all over the world in the vision of creating a sanctuary where students can harmoniously come together in a spiritual community and practice in implementing the teachings of Buddha Dharma in their daily lives. Now, lastly, for the benefit of the youth and everybody who's watching this program, I would like to humbly ask Rinpoche to impart onto us some teachings of Buddha Dharma that we can implement in our daily lives. In a gist.
In a gist. I think with the easy access to many wonderful teachings that are there, if a person has the interest, you can sort of, I think, get a lot of teachings very easily these days. So there's not much that I think differently or anything additional that I can add to it.
Yes.
I'm very mindful of the fact that this is a country, Bhutan is a country that really emphasizes its GNH, gross national happiness. And it's a thought that I have been thinking about a lot. And a lot of times, because also in the Buddhist approach, people tend to talk about how to cultivate happiness and so forth. I've also spoken a little bit about contentment earlier, so probably what I could briefly add is, what do we mean by happiness? You know, if you really see the index as happiness, you have to have a very good understanding of what it is, because happiness is one of the most elusive things. There is no such thing as happiness if we look carefully, because what makes you happy today may not make you happy tomorrow. What you think would make you happy may not necessarily be true. If you're happy today, you may not be happy tomorrow. And so, since it is something that is so elusive and endless, searching for happiness could be one of the most tiring searches that you embark upon. So therefore, I think from a Buddhist teachings perspective as well, happiness should be seen as genuine simplicity and contentment.
Yes.
It's absolutely important. Because if you're really genuinely content, you're happy where you are. You don't have miles to walk. You don't have many accusations to make. You don't have many things that you need to gather and surround yourself with. Who you are, where you are, in that natural simplicity, you can find the contentment and the greatest of joy in that moment. Now, a country like Bhutan, so deeply ingrained within the Buddhist teachings, that being one. Number two being that there seems to be among people, the lay people, especially the young generation, a curiosity about what Buddhism is.
Yes.
I think it's very important that we understand that Buddhism was never made to be a religion. It has become, and that's okay. There's nothing negative about that. Because there's a certain denomination of people for whom it has to be a religion, and that's the easiest way to approach, and they can benefit tremendously from it. But the meaning of Dharma, the very pivotal essence of what Buddha Dharma is that you have to take what it teaches to make beautiful who you are. And therefore, if that happiness is to be obtained, and that happiness and contentment has to be of good to yourself and to the others, study the Dharma. Study the Dharma in such a way that you extract the meaning of the teachings to becoming a fragrance in your life. That your heart and your mind, your attitude and your conduct inculcates all of the valuable teachings. That love is nothing to be, it's not a philosophy to teach. It's something to truly develop in your own heart. Kindness is not a book to buy and to quote and to learn and memorize. Kindness is to actually engage in your daily life. Truth is not something to meditate in a cave about. Truth is a principle that you stand by, because of which each day of your life can be better for yourself and for the others. And nothing would make the Buddhas and our great masters happier if that human being, through having brought about that understanding in life, led a good life that was a gift for yourself and for the others around you. So live life, live it well with simplicity and contentment. Make it better with the teachings. Use the resources that are at home. You don't have to travel the world looking for teachers and for teachings. It's right here in your doorstep. Make full use of that, but make full use of it so that you don't just become a religious person, but you become a good human being.
This has been a special episode of Jangchub Shing with Her Eminence Jetsun Khandro Rinpoche, and I would like to thank Rinpoche for making time for us, and it has been an honor and a privilege to be in your presence, and thank you for your words of wisdom.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.